This video is about employee resource groups. An employee resource group, or ERG, is a group of employees who have come together because of shared experiences. Usually experiences, for instance, gender, race, disability, or sexual orientation. So, some organizations have women in the workplace groups or networks for queer and gender nonconforming employees. Others have a network for disabled employees or networks for specific racial or ethnic groups. For instance, an Indigenous employee network or a Black employee network. Regardless of the experiences that bring employees together, an employee resource group is always structured in the same way. It's led by the employees themselves and not by a manager or supervisor. And membership is always voluntary, meaning an employee only joins if they want to. There aren't any managers or supervisors, quote unquote, pushing them to join. ERGs help foster a sense of community and support within the workplace. That's why they're an important part of building an inclusive culture. They create spaces where employees with common experiences can come together to share stories and ideas, provide mutual support, or advocate for change in their organization. For example, if an organization has a disability inclusion network, members might talk about times they've experienced discrimination at work because of their disability. They might draft a list of suggestions or considerations for ER or for leadership, advocating for changes that will help make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again. For example, an anti-discrimination policy that specifically addresses the needs of employees with disabilities, or an educational event where their peers can learn more about ableism and accessibility. Or maybe they'll request more professional development initiatives so that members have the opportunity to advance leadership positions where they themselves will be able to make a change. So employee resource groups often amplify the voices of underrepresented employees. They provide insight into the challenges these employees face. This, of course, means the organization can then address those challenges, making things more inclusive. But if all an ERG did was meet to discuss members' experiences without ever advocating for change, it would still make the workplace more inclusive. Why? Because those employees would know that they are not alone, that other people had the same experiences. Their experiences of racism and ableism or homophobia would be validated by other members. They might begin to feel a real sense of community, which maybe they haven't felt in other parts of the organization. So we've established the importance of ERGs. But how do you actually start an ERG in the workplace? There are a couple of steps. First, identify the focus of the ERG. Who do you think would be interested in joining an employee resource group? Employees with disabilities? Indigenous employees? 2. The next step is testing your theory. So, if you think maybe Indigenous employees would be interested, ask them. See what they say. If they respond positively, you can move on to the next step, which is number 3, leadership buy-in. Approach HR and senior leadership and explain the benefits of forming this particular ERG. Explain how it would align with the company's diversity and inclusion goals. Then, once you've got leadership buy-in, you can start recruiting members. Spread the word. Speak with employees who express interest and put together a small group of dedicated members. Once you've got members, work with them to define a mission and goals. Write a formal mission statement and set goals that reflect the things that the ERG hopes to achieve. 6. Next, it's time for logistics. Planning and organizing things to determine how often the group will meet, where they will meet, and what each meeting will look like. Number 7. And then it's time to launch the ERG. So, start building awareness, publicize the group, and broadcast it internally, inviting other employees to join and participate, either as members or as guests at the first event, which the ERG can now start planning. If you'd like to learn more about ERGs, consult the PDF included in this lesson. For now, let's talk about our 3 Jedi Hub lenses: disability, indigeneity, and racialized newcomer status. In terms of disability, make sure that meetings and events are accessible and that everyone can participate, including those with mobility-related disabilities, sensory disabilities, hearing or vision-related disabilities, and more. In terms of indigeneity, it's important that meetings and events hosted by the ERG acknowledge and respect Indigenous traditions, values, and histories, even if those meetings or events are not centered around indigeneity. Consider, for example, an ERG run by and for Black employees. The events they may host may not be centered around indigeneity, but they can still acknowledge and respect Indigenous traditions and histories by, say, acknowledging the land they are on, or by addressing the need for solidarity between Black and Indigenous peoples in Canada. In terms of racialized newcomers, it's important to consider any language barriers that might come up during ERG meetings or events. So, for the sake of employees who've yet to become completely fluent in English, use plain, straightforward language and avoid slang, acronyms, abbreviations, and idioms. For example, instead of saying someone is under the weather, we could just say that they are sick or ill. Or instead of saying something costs an arm and a leg, we could just say that it's expensive. Another thing to consider is whether newcomers have already adjusted to Canadian norms or standards. So, during meetings and events, try to create an environment where newcomers and all employees really feel comfortable asking about the unwritten social or cultural rules governing that meeting or event. Better yet, put the rules down in writing or state them out loud. This is going to help put guests or attendees' minds at ease. And not just those who are new to Canada. Employees who struggle with generalized anxiety disorder or autism spectrum disorder are going to appreciate this too. This brings us back to disability. All three of these groups, Indigenous employees, disabled employees, and racialized newcomers, can have their own ERGs. So you could have an ERG for Indigenous employees, an ERG for employees with disabilities, and an ERG for employees who identify as racialized newcomers. However, it's important to note that these categories often intersect, especially since anybody can become disabled at any time. So, a racialized newcomer can also be a person with a disability, and an Indigenous person can be both Indigenous and disabled. It's not one or the other. Our identities and experiences are shaped by tons of different factors, and it's important that our ERGs acknowledge and address these intersections. That's what intersectionality is all about. If you haven't already, I encourage you to go to Module 2 and check out the lesson on intersectionality. I also encourage you to check out the PDF in this lesson so that you can learn more about ERGs and how they can be used to build an inclusive culture. Nishan is going to take over from here. It's been an honor speaking to all of you. I'll see you on the next module.